Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you to episode 191 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, your one-stop shop for all services around FCPA compliance and ethics. Today, I start a three-part series with Maurice Gilbert, the managing partner at Concilium Partners. Maurice is one of the, if not the top corporate recruiters in the compliance space. He's been doing it for longer than anybody else I know of, and he knows everyone in the compliance space, both on the company side and frankly on the CCO compliance practitioner side. And I've been wanting to do a series with Maurice about the hiring process in compliance, so I finally got him to sit down for three interviews. And we're going to go through in detail the hiring process, starting with the company's decision to hire a compliance practitioner. This episode comes in at just over 24 minutes,
Hello, everyone.
and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
To this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today, I have with me Maurice Gilbert. Maurice is the head of the Concilium executive search firm. Maurice was kind enough to provide a guest post earlier this week entitled, "Why is it so hard to hire people in compliance?" And I got so many questions and comments about that blog post that I called up Maurice and said, "Hey, I think people might like to hear a little bit more about this." And so he graciously agreed to take some time to visit with me, and he's going to walk us through in several podcasts sort of the hiring process. And sort of with that, Maurice, welcome, and thanks for taking time to visit with us on this very interesting topic.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks for asking me to be part of your program.
So, Maurice, why is it so hard to hire people in compliance?
Well, you have this dynamic, number one, supply and demand imbalance. Compliance is still a relatively new functional skill set. So supply is very low, demand is very high, and with that imbalance, that creates problems for companies to source this professional profile. The other dynamic you have is that companies left of their own devices just don't have the relationships the way a specialized executive search firm like we do. We know these people. We have relationships that we've built over 10, 15 years with these professionals. So we have the relationships in hand. We know what these people are doing. We know what they're interested in, and that's the value proposition that we bring to our clientele.
Well, that's perhaps part of it, but in your blog post, it seemed that it was actually a little broader than that, or you gave a few more points, and you wrote about some of the issues you touched on there, which is obviously supply and demand. But one of the things that really came through to me from your blog post was the how to look for the right professional, and that in your experience, certainly many corporate types really don't. It's not that they don't know what they're looking for, but they might even not even know how to think through that process. So, in addition to having the large knowledge base that Concilium has, what is it that you can bring to the table and advise a company on, really to get them through the entire process? How does that start? How does once the CEO says, "Hey, I want to have a CCO or a chief compliance officer," what happens? How do you go from there?
Well, the process itself is initiated with a kickoff meeting with the client. It's typically done in their office, although it can be done remotely. The kickoff meeting with the client, you get all the key stakeholders. That would be the hiring authority, perhaps a senior VP of HR, and anybody else that would be a key stakeholder in the hiring decision. And you get them together with our point of contact. Perhaps it's myself if I'm leading that search. And you start to develop the actual criteria, the profile of what you're looking for. Well, you might ask, well, isn't it in the job description? No, it's not. Our clients will give us a job description. It's typically a legacy of various things that are not even updated. And it's a hodgepodge of things that maybe began a few years ago. But it needs to be updated to reflect what's going on in the company at that particular moment. So you have certain business risks, you have certain regulatory risks, and you need to be attentive to those risks so that you could build your profile about what those risks need to be addressed presently. I'll give you a case in point. If I'm XYZ company and I want to start doing business in China, then I need my profile to reflect that we want somebody who's had experience in handling compliance issues in China. So that needs to be flushed out and updated. Typically, what you're going to get in a company job description is just a litany of things that actually could be quite disjointed and may not necessarily make sense for what you're going to be asking the person to do. I'll give you a case in point. We completed a search for a chief compliance officer for a premier pharma company. And some of the criteria was we need a lawyer. We need somebody with typically a client will say between 15 and 20 years experience. We need somebody with pharmaceutical experience. Well, we challenged this in the kickoff meeting for several reasons. Number one, why does the person need to be an attorney? You have a whole cadre of attorneys on your staff. You need a compliance officer. But sometimes clients will put in criteria just because it's a legacy or they see some other company do it in a job description and they just think that they should ask for the same thing. Regarding pharma, what we find is medical device has a very comparable business model. So people who have medical device experience as a corporate compliance officer could very well fit in a pharma environment as well. So we challenge those legacy items that are typically put into a job description that's given to us. So we start with that job description that's given to us. We make certain challenges. We flush out really what the client needs. And the way we go about doing it is this way. We ask the question, what do you want the professional to accomplish within the first 12 months?
Let me stop you there because
Sure.
You just gave one of the key questions, one of the key early questions you asked. That had nothing to do with that list of criteria that you detailed that a company would send out. Is there a disconnect really between what the company thinks it needs and what it really needs, or why would you ask the question that's so different from their stated requirements for the position?
That's a great question because we have to help them develop the criteria and they buy into it. But when we ask the question, when we say, fine, you've put together a litany of 15 items on your wish list. It's a wish list. But when we ask the question and start taking them down the road of what do you want the individual to accomplish, then they understand that once we identify what they want accomplished, then you back into, so we need a professional who's done these specific things, who has a demonstrated track record in accomplishing the things that will be asked of this individual to be done the first year. That's the most on-target way to deliver the talent that the client is looking for. And when we pose that question, the light turns on for the client, and they say, now I get it. Now I understand why you're leading me down this road. Because arbitrary things in a legacy job description, they're just not relevant. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, but I'm wondering how do you help a client either walk through that analysis or work through that analysis if they've come to the meeting, if they've come with an expectation of, I want a top 10 law school grad, I want someone in the top 10% of their class, I want someone with 10 to 15 years experience, I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, E, and you've asked them to completely change their way of thinking. How do you walk them through that? That's a fairly radical shift.
Yeah, it is, and I understand your persistence in asking that question. Well, let's backtrack a moment. Before we have the kickoff meeting, our firm is vetted by the client to see if they want to retain our firm. And in the course of vetting us, in interviewing, checking our references, et cetera, in the course of doing that, we're already developing that trust and transparency so that we position ourselves as their business partner, their counselor. We're not just at that point, at the point of the kickoff meeting, in other words, we've already set the tone that we're a business partner, a trusted ally who brings expertise to the table, and they get it. In other words, an executive search firm like ours, we're not just an order taker. Do you want a ham and cheese sandwich? That's not what we do. They understand that we're there based upon the interview and vetting process that was done previously. They understand that we're there to be their partner, their counselor, and guide them through the entire process. So that's how we've already established ourselves and have won the trust and earned the trust of prior to the kickoff meeting. Does that make sense?
It does. So you obviously have a subject matter expertise in executive search, but now you've taken it to, you become the trusted advisor of the client. And but now could you, if I'm a head of HR or a stakeholder, perhaps CFO or even a CEO, and I'm sitting in this meeting, and I'm posed this question, what do you want the CCO to accomplish in his first 12 months? How do you walk them through creating a reasonable scope of that expectation, or do you just simply ask them to put everything up on the wall and then you try to guide them through what's reasonable or not? How does that process work?
Great question. Yes. When I posed the question of what would you like the person to accomplish within the first year, I usually tee it up, give me the 4 most significant things you'd like the person to accomplish.
Okay.
So that will preclude, again, another laundry list of we'd like the professional to accomplish 30 things within the first year, many of which are inconceivable. They have to be done in the course of several years. So when we're listening to the response, we again are counseling our client as to whether that makes sense or if that's an unreasonable, let's say, expectation. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Sure. You're helping the client understand what's really reasonable for not only the candidates to talk about, but beyond that, what's maybe reasonable for a new hire to come in and do in a 12, 18, 24-month period.
Precisely. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to this chief compliance officer again that we hired recently for a top 10 pharma. When I posed that question, one of the things that was flushed out was we would expect the new chief compliance officer to spend the first 2-3 months evaluating her staff to see if she has the appropriate team in place for the rest of the journey. And by the way, she's traveling all over the world doing just that, evaluating her staff.
Right.
That in and of itself takes 3 months. And then another thing that was flushed out was, and I believe this to be realistic, was we'd like a risk assessment to see what's hiding behind the closet. Well, that's, as you know from your profession, that's imperative. You can't go down a journey somewhere with blinders. You have to know where the greatest risks are so that initially you'll develop your program around the key risks facing your organization at this given moment in time. So, those are a few items that are realistic. But if you give a whole litany of 15 other things, that may be done over the course of 5 years, not one, a 12-month span, if that makes sense.
Sure. Now, within at this kickoff meeting, you've introduced this topic. You've already told us that this meeting, could be 1 hour, it could be multiple hours.
Yeah.
At the end of that meeting, is that when you have at least a preliminary sense of the criteria, or do you and Concilium need to go back, do some additional work, and present a more structured criteria to the client for final approval?
We hope to have the profile, again, if I'm the one heading up the search, when I walk away from the kickoff meeting, I will have everything I need to develop the profile. So what I'll do then is I'll take all my notes. I will then develop the profile, memorialize it, give it to the client, and say, is this what we're agreeing to? And once they bless it, then we're ready to commence the search, which is a subject of another day for us.
Right. In this initial meeting, do you discuss the topic of professional growth or professional growth opportunities, or does that topic come up in later discussions?
No, it does come up in this discussion because several things. There are two key elements, big picture, in the kickoff meeting. One, developing the candidate profile. The other key element is we have to capture data to develop a presentation to an executive that we're going to pitch the opportunity to. So in other words, we have to capture data such as what are career growth options once a person steps in and does a good job for 3 whatever years. We have to capture data. What is the culture of the company? What is the culture of the compliance department? What are the hot buttons and the management strategy, if you will, of the hiring authority, or how does that person like to interface with the individual? So like when we hired a chief compliance officer for a hospital system, he was to report to the CEO administratively and to the board of directors on a straight line. So we wanted to know the management style of the CEO, who would have a lot of interface with the chief compliance officer. So we have to capture those data points, and we also have to capture the selling points of the company, because that's all part of the presentation. So when I know we'll elaborate on this in another visit, but when we do the presentation to the professional that we're trying to recruit, we have to have a compelling story as to why they ought to entertain the opportunity.
You know, that's a great way to end this particular episode, to tell a story. And I advocate that in compliance officers need to use that concept more. And you've talked about that precisely. If I could sort of sum up where I think we've gotten today, is you've gotten the information which allows you to tell a story on behalf of your client to myself, others in the compliance profession you might deem an appropriate candidate. But I love that, the way you phrase that, to get enough information to tell a compelling story. So, Maurice,
exactly.
I look forward to visiting with you on an additional podcast where I hope to be able to talk to you about your strategy and messaging that you would think about and develop for candidates, how you would internally evaluate candidates to even consider for presentation, and then the presentation process that candidates need to consider. But those topics we'll take up in later podcasts. So this has really been a fascinating interview. You posed some facts in the blog post you had that I really didn't appreciate, and you said one of your focuses was, does the internal company recruiter have the expertise to evaluate a compliance officer? And I had thought, well, of course they do, because that's what internal recruiters do. But you have walked us through the series of steps that I think you go through, and you help companies walk through, to show that when you get to this high level of executive searches for lawyers, compliance officers, or others at the C-suite, you really do need a professional who has focused in this area, who can help the company focus on what their needs are before you even get to the issue of who are the potential candidates, the candidate interview process, and walking candidates through that. So really some great information. I hope that some HR professionals may have been listening to this, because they can use this as much as those of us in the compliance world do. Maurice, if anyone wanted to follow up with you on this, could they email you? And if so, how would they do it?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Tom. Anyone wishing to contact me directly, it's simply Maurice@Consilium.com. And if that's challenging to remember, Consilium is, they could just go to Consilium website, www.consilium.com, and they will find us. But we're, as you know, we're all over the internet because we publish a lot and we interface a lot with social media. So, and if someone wished to call me, that number is 972-934-8444, extension 100.
Well, Maurice, thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Tom. You asked some great, challenging questions. I appreciate it.
All right.
And I'll look forward to our next visit. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. If you have not signed up for my FCPA Masterclass, it's not too late. I have a couple of slots left. It will be held on September 10th and 11th in Houston, Texas. You can contact me or check out my website, Advanced Compliance Solutions, for more details. You can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Next week, we will have part 2 of my interview with Maurice Gilbert. We'll take a look at candidate sourcing, which Consilium does, and then the presentation of potential job offers to potential job candidates. I think you will find that equally enlightening as today's episode. I thank you for listening and look forward to visiting with you again.